Mr. Chairman, whenever you're ready.
All right. I'm going to call the Planning Board and Zoning Commission meeting for May 13th to order. Can we have the roll call, please?
Roberts. Here. Gray.
Sure.
Rubin. Eccles Bell. Boise.
Here.
Conley.
Here.
And Di Benedetto.
Here. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes for Planning Board and Zoning Commission meeting for April 22nd?
I move we approve the minutes for April 22nd.
Is there any discussion or corrections?
Correction? Yeah, I would second that motion, but also point out that under 3 in minutes, it was pointed out that minor edits should be M-I-N-E-R
Yeah,
instead of O-R.
well, that's true, yeah, young.
Yeah, young
Now I
edits.
understand what you were saying.
Now it makes sense. So that's the only correction I noted. And that was just spelling, not content.
Did you catch that, Connor?
Yep.
Anything else? So I guess have a roll call for the corrected minutes.
Roberts.
Yes,
Gray.
Yes.
Boise.
Yes.
Conley.
Yeah.
And Di Benedetto.
Yes. All right, communications from the board and council. Anything new on urban renewal, Perry?
nothing since the, public meeting on, April, what day was that?
30th.
30th. Boy, it was like yesterday.
How did it go?
It went well. We had presentations on the URA, which was basically a recap of what we saw last December 2nd, but the public hadn't seen it. And it's now posted, I haven't double checked, but I think it's posted on the city's website, I think. And then we did, the second part of it was the work session on, visioning for the Rocky Fork Inn property. And that got a ton of feedback. All the tables had, like, 17 by 24 printout of an overview, a Google Maps image of or Google Earth image looking down on it. And then there was little, trees or tables or what have you that were approved, FEMA approved additions that could be added, and people placed those on the overview. And I thought the feedback and input on that was really good. That wasn't part of the URA portion, but let the mayor comment on it more if there's more to say. But,
Did you have a good public turnout?
yeah, there were over 60 people there.
Oh, good.
So it was pretty good turnout, yeah.
Real good, actually.
And there's also food.
When there was food, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, of course, got to that.
Okay.
Okay, don't have a city council rep or a county rep, so communication from the mayor.
And I'll try to cover the stuff that would probably been covered from a council perspective as well. The Parks Board met last Wednesday, and unanimously passed their blessing or approval, or however you want to put it, as far as the trail, or accepting the O'Neill donation for the trail. So that'll go to council next. It's going to involve both the admin and probably the land use team. The city and the donor are getting together and handing out final details as far as like where the border is going to be. There was some discussion about making it wider at the top so that they can have more or less grade, I guess, to the switchback, basically more length for the switchback. The staff reports on that are that we're going to want, from a city perspective, we'll want to get an engineering report before we construct a trail, but it also felt like the order there was that we accept the donation and then get the engineering report once it's our land rather than doing an engineering report on somebody else's land. And the terms they were looking at is like there'll be I'm donating, but if you don't do something within X number of years, then it reverts back. So if we find out that there's a problem with something, so like I said, they're getting together and hammer that stuff. I don't think that's accepting that donation is not something that I anticipate coming before this board, but there will be, when we redo zoning maps and stuff like that, that'll be a new piece of land that we need to identify as park land that attaches to that little triangle that's already up there as park land.
Does it have to be surveyed?
It has been surveyed.
It has.
But I think the survey is going to change a little bit. So it has been surveyed. The donation is for 1 acre. The question that has come up is it the most optimum acre for all of the goals that are in mind? So that, as I said, I think it's subject to a little bit of tweaking. But until that's done, all the parties have to agree, and certainly the donor has to agree with that. The other thing, same area but not related, there has been a request that's coming in for basically an encroachment agreement. There's a property that was identified, it was actually identified last year that is encroaching on city land, and they have come to a council. They're going to be starting that process. My recollection is that's not normally stuff that comes to the planning board. That's strictly a council decision, but just for awareness, that the planner will be involved, the attorney will be involved, and they'll come up with a scalable solution that's there. But I mention that just so that the planning board has an awareness that that's there. I do know that after that request came in, I sat down with the public works director who went through and identified probably closer to hundreds than dozens of spots within the cities where there are problems. And part of it has to do with, it was like at some point in time, there was like a major shift in cadastral. Everything moved over 5 or 10 feet or something. So it's an interesting can of worms that we'll get to deal with. So, and that's all that I'm aware of, unless there are any specific questions from the board.
I was just going to ask on the trail, the engineering report, is that going to include the final route and design for the trail?
I believe so. I'll leave that to our public works director, but that was my sense from talking to him, is that the main concern was just, there's been several engineers who've looked at it and said, we're not really concerned with sloughing or environmental stuff. But from a city perspective, we want somebody to sign that, put that on a piece of paper so that we're covered from a city standpoint. And so we'll probably, and so he was reaching out to our contract, who we already have on contract to do that. So, but that'll be a secondary step. And then they talked about basically signing off and approving. I think they've already mapped out what they think it's going to be, but the engineer would say yes, or we make these tweaks.
So the route is actually pretty well finalized then?
No. The route is not finalized, but the proposed route is dictating where the boundaries are.
Okay.
And that's what I'm saying. So I think that there's a conversation about changing the survey boundaries based on the proposed route and proposed improvements, but that's not the official engineering report. That's just a bunch of other people with knowledge anticipating what the recommendations will be. You know, if it would be better if you can this.
Okay. Any other questions for the mayor?
Does, you know, if they consulted a hydrologist yet on that?
No, that'll be the part that we do after we accept the donation and before we build a trail. That's who we'll bring in to do that.
Okay, thank you.
So that will be part of that report.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to wait until it's our land before we do that.
Anything else? All right, open it up for public comment for anybody in the audience. And on the agenda, we have 2 opportunities for public comment. One is now, which you can comment on anything on the agenda or anything else you would like to comment on. And then at the end of the meeting, we'll also have another public comment period. So I'll open it up to anybody in the audience who would like to make a comment.
I'll just kind of make an introduction, if you don't mind.
Sure.
My name is Ron Chewin. Several months ago, I was selected to be the new chairman for the Golf Course Homeowners Association. So I know we've got the Spires deal going on there, and so that's been a big concern with a lot of people. So I just thought I'd come down, introduce myself, and sit and listen and see what's up from there.
Okay. Go ahead, Steve.
Just
Introduce yourself and for the record as well as your address.
you heard that, didn't you?
I did. If you choose to omit that, I'll let the manager of the meeting handle it.
No, that's okay. Steve Smith, 517 North Hauser. We're just laughing about the city council meeting last night. City council meeting, you don't have to state your address anymore.
Well,
You can. Anyway, so that's kind of an inside joke here. I just want to point out for the board, just on the trail, that my understanding, and it's my understanding, that where the rough area, or the pretty close area to where the trail is going to go, has been established, and as the mayor said, there's going to be some tweaks to it. So kind of an idea where what I'll call the upper part of the trail will generally be. What has not been decided was once the trail comes down off of the bench, if you're coming downhill, heading east, and get down on flatter ground, there's been some contention about then where does the trail go? Because there are a number of options for someone using the trail to continue down to Word and get into town. And to my understanding, that question, which is kind of contentious because there are several options on where to go once you're down. You don't have far to go, but you've still got to get down to Word, that some local landowners are concerned about just how that's going to plan out. So it's just be aware that there's going to be some more contention on just what that is. Does it go down by the donor's house on the extension of North Word? No.
Fourth?
Adams, thank you. North Adams, as it goes north, because that is where the trail kind of comes down. There's no North Adams, or there's just a walking path. There's no street there. If you do that, you go down and you pass the donor's house, and there's some question as to, does the donor think that's okay? There's another couple of possibilities on going around some plum trees and if that's going to require some switchbacks. So I think there's still work to be done on, it hasn't been decided on that. That's just that little section at the bottom of the trail. Okay, thanks.
All right, thanks. Any other comments from the audience? Anybody online?
Mr. Chairman, I see no raised hands or additional cameras turned on online.
All right, I'll close the public comments section. Yeah, I guess from what you were saying, Mayor, the trail itself, it's not something that's going to come before the planning board, correct? I
don't believe they traditionally have. I did share just the discussion, so the answer is yeah. Again, the short answer is I don't believe it comes to the planning board other than as this piece of land here gets donated, it'll need to be added to the triangle that does exist.
So what we would be dealing with would be simply the zoning change.
Yeah, just the zoning map change specifically even.
All right. moving on, no, there's no new business. Moving down the agenda to old business, continue review of the 2025-26 zoning regulations update, and I'll turn it over to you, Jeremy.
Are you gonna pull those up, Connor?
Yep.
I believe, if I recall, we got through plan unit development last time, and we're starting into chapter 4. I think we did start with conditional uses briefly. We talked about burden of proof and the CUP process addition stuff. So I think we can move on to the next page, unless there was anything that somebody I'll just open it up first. If there's anything anybody wants to go back to discuss before we move on.
Anything?
I hate going backwards.
I always like-
review it.
I always like to open that up just in case somebody thought of something from the last meeting that we want to go back to and just chat about before we keep moving forward. So, okay. I think Connor, you can go past this page to go to the next section. Okay, so we're still under conditional uses. And so we're into the next page. I have a few revisions in here that I'm proposing. So the first one is basically G, which would be site suitability. The subject site is physically suitable for the proposed conditional use, including access, topography, and infrastructure availability.
Other directions.
So essentially what I did
Okay.
here was I added, so under findings of fact, I guess I should provide some context. So under findings of fact, these are the things that we review for a conditional use permit, right? So these are the things that you typically see in a staff report, right? Consistency with the gross policy, compatibility with the neighborhood, minimizes the adverse impacts, minimizes adverse environmental impacts, impact on public facilities and services, and then any hazards and nuisances that might be created by the proposed use. So these next ones are just kind of an addition to those items above that we would address in staff reports that would come to the council. And I think an important one is site suitability, right? Just making that determination that the site is suitable for the actual use that's being proposed. That would include appropriate access, topographic suitability, and then any infrastructure availability. Zoning district intent, basically this would finding that the conditional use is consistent with the purpose and intent of the underlying zoning district. And I think that's important because in most of your zoning districts, or actually I think all of your zoning districts, you have a purpose and intent section of those districts. And so I think adding this in there just provides another finding to make sure that we're being consistent with the purpose and intent that you have outlined in your zoning districts.
Yeah,
next- Go ahead.
I just said I like that purpose and intent for the zoning district. I like that.
Next one, public health and safety and welfare. Basically, just the condition will, or the use will not be detrimental to public health, safety, and the general welfare. That's a pretty standard finding for most decisions by boards, either on subdivision or zoning, is to make a finding that the use is not detrimental to public health and safety and general welfare, or if it is, what are the conditions that mitigate that, right?
Sure.
And then other codes, the conditioners complies with all applicable city codes and ordinances. Any comments or questions on those additions?
I was just kind kind of thinking about the airline, the airplane zone that we turned it down based on that? Because that's an FAA thing. Is this not, it doesn't need to be done here. It's not other codes, but it is other restrictions. And I don't know if this is.
I mean, that's, I would say that falls under more of a public health and safety and general welfare standard, right? Because that's
Okay.
an FAA safety requirement. So I think that, and if I recall back to looking at that, I want to say that was the finding under that, was it was a public health and safety thing because it didn't meet the FAA requirements. And I think the other thing is to consider is that overlay district also says that you have to comply with the FAA regulations. So
Yeah, so that's covered.
because the applicable codes, this applicable codes piece would apply to the sections of the zoning too, right? So it has to be in compliance with the zoning district standards or the overlay district standards, right?
Yeah.
So I think we're covered here. I think that could be covered on several different of these findings. I mean, you could even classify that as site suitability, right? Because it's in that protection zone. Is the site suitable for that proposed use, right? My argument might be that in a finding, in that situation, a finding might be no, because the FAA regulations don't allow that type of use. So the site technically isn't feasible for that use, right? So I think you could fit that under several of these findings as justification for a finding for denial.
That works.
Anybody else have any comments? It looks good, Jeremy.
Okay, I added a section on conditions of approval. This was something that was not in this section. I thought that this was important to add. In granting a conditional use permit, the planning board, zoning commission may impose reasonable conditions necessary to ensure compliance with standards and findings of fact, mitigate adverse impacts on neighboring properties and the surrounding area, ensure compatibility with the character of the zoning districts, and protect public health, safety, and welfare. And then such conditions shall be directly related to and roughly proportionate to the impacts of the proposed use. That's just kind of standard planning language based on case law, that your conditions have to be in rough proportionality to the impact that you're trying to mitigate, right? So there's a lot of case law around the country to that effect, with jurisdictions that have, or put in conditions that are, way outside of what is proportional to the actual impact, right? For example, if somebody was proposing one of these multifamily housing units that we've seen, and the city came back and said, okay, well, we really like roundabouts as traffic control, so we want you to put a roundabout in at the intersection, that something like that, right? I mean, you couldn't just without a finding that says, based on, say, a traffic study, right, that says a roundabout would be required if this is done, it would be, you couldn't justify that proportionality, if that makes sense, right? We use the same language in subdivision rule review too, right? The condition has to be proportionate to the impact that you're mitigating. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, anybody have any comments or questions on that section?
I can think of an instance with that proportional one is where we were requiring the builder to pave the entire alley instead of, when he's just building on 1/6 of the lot. And that would be the proportional. That would be, that doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah, that could be
And
an
that's-
example. Yep. I mean, typically in those situations, the way we handle that is, you need to pave the portion of the alley that it's adjacent to your development, not necessarily
course.
the entire, the entire alley.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but if that's something that there's also, if the developer offers that as mitigation or offers that up that they want to do that, that's different, right? This is more in
Yeah.
lines with what the city is going to require outside of what the developer may be offering to mitigate any impacts. And so there's kind of
Yeah.
this, I've been in situations where, especially in subdivision review, where I've been in a position where it's like, well, it's kind of on the fine line of whether the city can really require that. But I've said this at planning board and city council meetings, if the developer would like to offer that as mitigation, then we can add that as a condition because we have it in the record that the developer is offering to do that, right? To mitigate this public health and safety concern. And one example is we had a subdivision in East Helena where we required a bike and pedestrian path along the highway adjacent to their subdivision, but there was probably another mile to the actual highway where they would have to cross to get into the city. And so I had the question, well, from the planning board, can we require them to put the trail in all the way to the highway so that they can get to the signalized intersection and cross the highway? Well, technically it's offsite improvements, and it's kind of a fine line as can we really require that? But the developer stood up and said, that's my property. I own that section of land all the way to the highway, so I will go ahead and offer to do that. And so then we added it as a condition because they offered it. Right? So I think it's legal wrangling, right? I mean, with all this stuff, you're just trying to balance legally what you can and can't do. So, so you hopefully don't get sued. If that makes sense.
It does.
So yeah, it's really kind of a case by case basis. We just have to look at each development separately. You can't put every development in a nice little box. Every development is unique, and what we're trying to do is be as flexible as we can so that we have the ability to do certain things or require certain things as we can. But I do know this is a huge issue, has been for years. There's lots of case law on conditions and making sure that conditions are proportionate to the impact that you're mitigating. And they always side on the developer side for the most part, because it's usually a city or a county that requires something that's way outside of what they really should be requiring. And so the developer turns around and sues, right? And then that goes through the courts, and typically the developer wins that because they asked for too much. All right, are we good there?
Yep.
Okay. So the next section is I just added a section, run with the land, which I think you already had that, but I just kind of just beefed that up a little bit. The conditional use permit shall run with the land subject to continued compliance with all conditions of approval. So just basically kind of a clarification that it doesn't matter who owns the land, the conditional use permit, once approved, follows the property. Now I did add 3 sections or a couple of sections after this that weren't in here. One of them is revocation. I think that it's important to have a section in here that allows the city the ability to revoke a conditional use permit if it's found that they are not meeting their requirements, right? So a conditional use permit may be revoked by the Planning Board Zoning Commission if the use is found to be in violation of any of the conditions of approval, the use is operated in a manner that is materially different from the approved permit, the use creates a nuisance or hazard not anticipated at the time of approval, and And then revocation shall occur only after notice and an opportunity for a hearing. So obviously you have to provide the owner the opportunity to respond, and go that route. So any thoughts on that?
Do we need to have, like revocation shall occur only after notice? Should we define how much notice?
Well, it's going to be it says opportunity for hearing. So public hearing notice is a minimum of 15 days for a public hearing. But yeah, we could establish a notice. We could say revocation shall occur only after. I mean, so usually in cases of violations, like if we issue a violation letter, we typically provide a 30-day correction. So we'll issue a violation letter and provide them 30 days to correct before we go further with legal action. So we could do something like that. We could say revocation shall occur only after a 30-day notice or something.
But the way you've got it actually might be better, because if we decide at some point we want to give them 60 days, or if it's a safety violation, 15 days. So if we just leave it after notice.
Yeah, then I think it's a little more flexible. We could kind of more work through it like a violation, because I know in past cases on violations where we've given them 30 days, as long as they've responded within 30 days and outlined a time frame to which they'll correct, we've allowed them to 60 days to correct, or 90 days, or depending on what the issue is. Usually where we find an issue is if we send notice and then we don't hear anything from them, right? They just basically ignore us, then that's where it goes into that legal realm and that legal action.
So this sentence is better in that it doesn't define what kind of a notice. I like it better than defining it.
Okay.
Anybody else have any comment? I think this is a good addition. That's something that we haven't had in zoning before, and this kind of lays out, because there's been questions in the past of whether conditions have been followed after they've been approved by the planning board, and so this kind of gives some fallback or some basis for ensuring that they do in fact follow and implement the conditions that they've agreed to.
Yeah, and most of our conditions is something that Brian has been kind of reviewing at the time they submit their building permit, right? He's been going through those conditions, and I just helped him review the landscape plan for the Anglers Bend one, right? And those kinds of things. So, I mean, I think that for the most part that's being done, but I think it's important to have this in there because, there could be instances where you do have conditions for a certain use that, maybe I'm thinking in terms of more of like maybe a commercial use where you've established operating hours, where they can't operate past 10 o'clock or something like that. Or maybe a signage requirement, something where it's clear that they've violated that because now they're actually open till midnight, or they're, whatever. And that, and now, and it's, you have the ability to say, hey, you're in violation of your conditional use permit. You either need to go through the process and get this amended, you need to fix your hours so you're not open past 10, or we're going to go through this process, right? And then you're basically in violation of zoning, and that's a legal matter. The city attorney can take you to court. So there's ramifications for your current ordinances really have any ramifications for not following the conditional use permit, other than the city attorney could potentially say, well, they're in violation of the zoning because they're in violation of their conditional use permit. But I think this just offers a method for the city to be able to revoke that CUP if there's a violation.
Out of curiosity, when we issued a conditional use permit at one point, one of the conditions we required ended up coming to Public Works, and it wasn't feasible. And so it wasn't done because Public Works said, no, you don't have to do it. Is there something that we need to do to amend a conditional use permit?
Well, modifications, so the next section does talk about modifications.
Okay.
To a CUP. But I think also that it's important, it's equally important in the conditional use permit in the staff report, how the condition is written, right? And so I think that when I write conditions, I try to do it in such a way where it's based on, if it's something like an infrastructure condition or something like that, right? It's based on Public Works approval, or it's right. So if you're saying something like, okay, you have to install a stormwater pond or I don't know what it might be, or a driveway or something. If MDT comes back and says, no, we're not going to allow an approach right there, right? Then now they're technically in violation of that conditional use permit. But if you write the condition in such a manner to say, you need approval of MDT to put in that access, or approval of Public Works, or you know what I mean? Like, I think there's ways to write the condition in which you're not technically in violation if one of those other entities says, no, you can't do that.
Okay.
But I think it's difficult to answer that question because every project is different. So it really just depends on what you're talking about. Access is one of those things. I use that as an example. It's probably a bad example because if you can't get an MDT approach permit, then you have no access for your project, and you can't really do it, right? So that was probably a bad example, but anyway, you get what I understand. You understand what I'm saying. So
yeah. Okay.
Any other comments?
Not there.
So the next section is modifications. I just had I had minor modifications, so minor changes that do not increase impacts may be approved administratively. So this is anything that just is not increasing the impact. So I'm thinking things like, if they move a building slightly and it still meets setback requirements, they're not going to, you know what I mean? Those types of just minor modifications that don't necessarily impact the overall impacts of the project, right? They're still meeting the setback requirements. They're still meeting parking requirements, or, they're still generally in compliance with zoning district standards and what was reviewed, right? So anything that's minor, and then major changes, major modifications. So this would be changes that increase intensity, scale, or impact shall require a new conditional use permit. So essentially, if they're adding another dwelling unit or more dwelling units, right? Or if they're reducing the number of parking spaces down because they find they actually can't fit them on the site, or they're increasing the height of their building, or the design of their building in cases of design review or something, right? Then those would be major modifications. And I think that's a situation where we would require them to come back through the conditional use permit review process. And that's pretty standard. That's pretty standard in zoning, to require that.
Well, Jeremy, I'm just trying to think outside of the box, probably too much, but would purpose also be something that should be included there? Because someone might get a conditional use permit to build something for X, and somewhere along the lines, their plans change and they want to make it Y. Which might...
I think that goes towards intensity and scale, right? Because I think it depending on the change of use, it could be a minor change, right? If for instance, if you do a conditional use permit for a restaurant, and then somebody comes in and changes it to buys it and says, well, I don't really want to do a restaurant per se, but maybe I want to do a coffee shop or a little cafe, right? I would say that's similar or actually probably less intense use than a restaurant.
Yeah.
So in that case, I would say that's like a minor change and could be reviewed administratively. But if somebody goes the other way,
What if a bar and casino, you know?
yeah, I mean, there's certain changes, so if you're going from one use that's a permitted use to
Right.
it doesn't have a conditional use permit anyways, but you're changing it to a casino that's a conditional use permit, that requires a conditional use permit anyway. Like we
Sure.
would require that kind of thing. This is only if you're changing any changes to an issued conditional use permit, right?
Okay, so they have to come back for a new conditional use permit for that type of a change.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. And I mean, I think you can get a pretty good handle on what uses are similar and compatible as far as intensity and stuff. But sometimes I always, if there's any question, I always err on the side of caution and be like, well, this is probably an increased impact or increased use from what was previously approved. So we probably better just go through the conditional use permit process and just make sure that we're, all the T's are crossed and I's are dotted and all that good stuff.
Yep. I got it.
That way there's no questions. I think that was only changes to CUP section were those, which is enough, I guess.
I was gonna make a suggestion under the minor modifications to maybe expand that a little bit to the similar wording that you have under the major modifications. So minor changes that do not increase the intensity, scale, or impacts.
Yeah.
May be approved, just to kind of.
Yeah, be consistent.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. That's a good comment.
Anybody else have any comments?
No.
We're good to move on, Jeremy.
Okay. All right, we're down into use-specific standards. I did get into this partway, did not get as far as I was hoping to get, but we'll just keep plugging away at it here, and I'll offer my comments on the fly, I guess, depending how far we get. So the first one is bed and breakfasts. The only changes I had, these I compared with Montana code, and just to make sure that we were in compliance with any Montana code or consistent with Montana code. And so the first one is maximum number of bedrooms, and under this one, the first one is definition. I got a comment here. MCA definition of a bed and breakfast means a private owner or manager occupied residence that is used as a private residence, but in which breakfast is served and included in the charge for your guest room, and the number of daily guests served does not exceed 18. In your definition, you say max 5 guests, or 5 guest units. So I guess my thought is maybe we want to update this to be consistent with Montana code definition. But I wanted to see what your thoughts were.
But I guess I read that as 5 guest units, and that would be rooms.
Or bedroom.
Or bedrooms.
Bedroom.
And then if you have 2 per bedroom, that's 10. So, but that we're still under Montana's 18.
Yeah, and they could put, you know, double beds or a bunk bed or a
That's
bunk
true.
bed.
Yeah,
So it could go as high as 4, but it wouldn't be all of the rooms that would be as high as 4. So I think the 5 bedrooms, I think our concept, our intent from the beginning was not to have a giant bed, you know, it's a house. So, you know, 5 bedrooms is a pretty big house. And it would be 6 including the owner, so
that's true.
I'm fine with just 5 bedrooms.
Leaving it at 5 guest units.
Yeah, I mean, there could be a baby involved and, you know, different things.
Yeah, I'm not
So-
saying you have to update it to the MCA definition. I'm just pointing that out. You know, I don't know the backstory and history with this section, so you guys do. So it was just just as comparison. There's going to be quite a bit of that going through this use specific standard stuff on comparing with what Montana code is versus you know, versus what we have, right?
Sure.
Yeah. I'm okay either way.
Yeah, I don't see a contradiction between 1 and 2, the maximum number of,
And nobody's gonna be peeking in the windows to count how many people are in
Right.
the bedrooms.
maybe it should say maximum number of guests instead of maximum number of rooms.
Yeah, yeah. But
Maybe that's
again, who's gonna be counting?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those
Only if there's people
Yeah, that's-
unintentional.
complaining.
That's a good point. You make a good point. It's easier to review number of units versus how many people are using it. So I guess looking at it from that point of view, I agree with that. I think keeping it to units is easier from a enforcement and regulation standpoint. We can count the number of units. So I think I like that. I like that.
Okay.
So we can take that out, and then that basically negates my comments on the next section because I kind of changed it to serve more than 18 guests. But I think we'll just go back to the five rooms. Do we want to say 5 guest units and be consistent with the definition though, instead of 5 rooms?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
guest units up above, but then we say 5 rooms in maximum number of rooms.
And it's Montana, it might be somebody out in a teepee.
Yeah, could be. You never know. I mean,
Yeah.
teepees are pretty cheap to put up, so you could put 5 teepees out in your lawn and call it a bed and breakfast, right?
Breakfast. Give them a bagel.
Have a yurt place.
A yurt.
So I guess I was just looking at the definition that, you know, other than the discussion about the 5 guest units, which I'm okay with, is I like the rest of that definition because it's a little bit clearer, more specific than what we currently have. Like, bed and breakfast means a private owner or manager occupied residence that is used as a private residence, but in which breakfast is served, included in a charger room, and the number of, and we don't. So I guess I'm thinking about having the definition have what you have written there, except instead of 18 for B, it'd be let the maximum number of 5 guest units be put in place of that.
So you're saying you like the MCO definition, yeah.
It's clearer, because I remember us having a big conversation and discussion between what's the difference between a short-term rental and a bed and breakfast.
I was just gonna get to that, because short-term rental could also have an owner occupant that could have 6 or 8.
But the difference is that they don't serve breakfast.
Yeah.
That's basically the.
And this
Yeah,
kind
I
of
like
better-
that. I think that's a good addition.
Operators shall live on the property. I like that part. Shall live on the property.
Okay.
Okay.
Under duration of stay, I just had a question. How is this enforced? You in the regulations, it says bed and breakfast provide short-term lodging and guests shall not stay more than 14 days in a 30-day period. That seems hard to enforce, and I don't know if the city wants to enforce that. Um, and I didn't see that actually in the MCA code that was a requirement under bed and breakfasts. So I guess my recommendation would be to take that out because that's hard to, I think that would be hard to,
Impossible.
Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those things that's just going to be hard to police, right?
Yeah.
Somebody wants to stay 30 days in a bed and breakfast,
More power to
more
them.
power to them.
Yeah.
They got the checkbook.
What's the big deal? Honestly.
So we're in agreement to take that out.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. I don't have this in here as a comment, but parking and signage both. Parking shouldn't that any parking requirements be moved to the parking section? I don't see why we have parking here. It seems like parking should be addressed in the parking standards. So I guess my recommendation would be to take it out here and just make sure this is addressed in the parking standards.
Well, honestly, I don't know that we've ever enforced that either, because the places I can think of that have been bed and breakfast haven't offered that many parking places.
Well, I think the more things that we can consolidate into sections, it's easier for the reviewers who's reviewing it. We're not going through multiple sections trying to figure out what we have to look at, right? If we know it's
Right.
we're just going to the parking section. That's all we have to worry about is the parking section. We're not
I
bouncing
agree. We
sections.
also run the risk of having different standards in different sections that are conflicting, so.
But you know, the thing about this is if somebody wanted to open up a bed and breakfast in town, and this is only requiring one parking space for 2 units. I mean, that's not over the top. And we don't have that anywhere else in here.
Well, that's what I'm
There's
saying.
nowhere-
We just need to move it to
Yeah.
the parking section. So we just
Yeah.
need to add bed and breakfast to the parking table as a use and add this information into the parking section.
So if I want to open a bed and breakfast, I have to keep jumping around to different places to find the parking?
No,
This is very specific, and it's specific uses. I can't see that there won't be anything in there regarding parking, and so they won't.
but all
do
your other
anything.
parking standards are in the parking section. So the size of parking spaces, the layout of parking lots, all of that stuff is in the parking section. We want to keep all of the parking stuff with the parking section, including all of the use parking requirements. That's what I'm so we're not bouncing around. So all of our parking stuff is in one section.
So as a compromise, could we just under parking reference that other section?
That's
This is
fine.
only one line. It's one line here versus that line.
Yeah.
To me, if I were gonna open a bed and breakfast, I would come to the specific uses, and that would be it. So I just think that we might as well leave it in.
I'm just
It's
making-
one line.
I'm just making my suggestion. It's up to you
Yeah.
guys. It's your document. So, I as a reviewer that reviews these all of the time, on a daily basis, it's easier for a reviewer that if all the stuff is in a certain spot. So we're not bouncing around. So if we're reviewing an application for parking, we go to the parking section. That's where all the stuff for parking is. If we're reviewing signage, we go to the signage section. In this case, we're just bouncing around and we're trying to find it. That's just my perspective, but I can see it from your side too. So again, it's your document. It's up to you.
So you think we should also strike signage from bed and breakfast as well as parking?
I think all the signage stuff should be in the sign section.
I'll defer to you, Jeff.
Yeah, see, I'm thinking of it as the person who's starting a bed and breakfast, having all the requirements in one spot. Not
I
for
can,
the
I can
city
see it, I can
limits.
see it from that perspective too. So, I mean, again, yeah, it's up to you guys. I'm just, my perspective is as a reviewer. So, it helps, make sure that everything is consistent. If we have everything that's similar is in the same spot, so that we make sure that we're being consistent with everything. So
And
we're
I
not
see
bouncing
that
around.
too. I see that too.
But
Seems
the,
like-
the compromise might be a good idea. Maybe in here, instead of having this, we just say for parking requirements, see section, whatever. And then you just
And for
flip that.
signage.
And same thing for signs. And then you just flip to that section and that's where it is. So.
Go ahead, yeah.
That's kind of what I was gonna say, is that we could have the details under the signage section, but if somebody's just kind of reviewing our some requirements for, say, a bed and breakfast, and they want to, and the fact that parking is highlighted as a heading, but then within that it says see the parking section, whatever that number is, and same for the signage,
That would be the minimum for me.
Well, then I would say in every one of these specific uses, we should do that. We should add that same section, because there's some of these sections where we don't have parking requirements. The next section is
Right.
daycares. Like daycare and groups care centers, there's no section in here on parking. So the assumption would be then we go to the parking section and see what the parking requirements are for a daycare facility. But that's again, going back to consistency, right? Some of these specific uses don't have parking requirements. Some of them do. I think I'm just trying to make sure that we're consistently pointing people to the right spot, and we're being consistent with all of our rules, right? Making sure we're not saying one thing in one section and another thing in another section.
I think the reason why parking is highlighted here is because bed and breakfasts typically are within a residential area, and parking is kind of limited
And
here.
signage.
I
So
mean, the same could be
I
said for
think the
daycare.
reason why parking might be listed under this particular use is just as a reminder that anybody that's thinking about a bed and breakfast needs to also consider parking requirements, and so
Yep.
kind of steers to that section.
Nope, that makes
And
sense. I think same thing for signage too, right? I think we should just make
Yeah.
sure, just do the same thing under signage, and we just point them to the signage section, and then we make sure, as we get to the signage section, that we're adding whatever this requirement is into the signage section. If it's different,
That works.
if it's different from what we already have, that's something I'd have to look at. I don't know if it's different or not.
Well, the way I read signage, it's confusing. It sounds like it's creating special rules for bed and breakfast, but unless you're in a commercial district, then the other rules apply.
But we could in signage have a specific area in a residential zone.
Which you already do. You already have a residential sign requirements, so we can add this to that residential sign requirement, right?
Yeah.
And just see how this compares to what you're already requiring for residential signs. I think that's just an exercise we need to do anyway, just to make sure we're being consistent. Because the one thing I think you want to be careful of is you're not treating one use differently than another use. Like if you're allowing a home-based business, say a lawyer that's working out of their home, right? If you're allowing them say a 16 square foot sign in a residential district, but then you turn around and say, oh, but yeah, for bed and breakfast, we're only going to allow 6 square feet, right? That's not really fair. Like you need to be consistent across all uses. So it should be based on zoning district and what you allow for any use in that zoning district.
Yes,
We agree.
So, okay, I think we're
Yeah,
through.
if I recall, I think our zoning, our signage, we specify smaller signs in the residential area than commercial.
definitely.
And that's consistent. I mean, that's pretty typical. Most jurisdictions don't allow large signs in residential. You don't want people putting up big 32 square foot signs on their lawn, all over the place, right? I mean, that's pretty, although 6 square feet is pretty tiny.
It's 2 by 3. It's a real estate sign.
Yeah, that's not very big if you're trying to advertise a bed and breakfast business. I can't, so anyway, we'll review that when we get to the sign section and make sure that we're being consistent. So,
Okay.
all right, we're on daycare and group care facilities. So I've made some modifications here based on state law definitions. And so that's basically my changes here are state law definitions for these types of facilities. So the first one is daycare facility. The person or so this is the so daycare facility is a regular, like a daycare where you would have it's not an in-home daycare place, right? It's somebody it's a larger facility that probably, in maybe a commercial type setting that people drop their kids off and provide that parental care. And then you go to daycare center, that's an at-home place in which care is provided to 13 or more children. So that definition, I just changed the name because that's daycare center goes with that definition under MCA. And then I added family daycare home. That's a private residence in which daycare is provided to 3 to 8 children. So that's a smaller than a daycare center, right? And then you have the group daycare home, a private residence or other structure in which daycare is provided to 9 to 12 children. So there's just these different tiers, and I think it's based on the licensing requirements for each one of those.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Which we have no clue of.
Well, now you do. Kind of.
Yeah.
Kind of. And then
Well, okay, I have a question with that then. Should we just reference it back to the state law then instead of having it in this, or so that when it does get updated by the state, it reflects it? So we have to come back to this?
You don't have to change it.
I mean,
well,
we don't have to change,
I think it's
'cause I
important
know
to
they'll
have,
get changed on.
I think it's important to have the definitions in here because in our land use table, there's certain things we're not going to allow in certain places, right? So a daycare facility, you're not going to necessarily want in a residential zoning district, right?
Okay.
But because that's probably more of a commercial type use because it's more like a school, right? Because it's not an at-home facility. But then the other uses are really they're private residence, at-home facilities. Those uses could be allowed in residential, depending on how many, but I think I'd have to go back to the land use table and see, I want to say there is we don't have to do it tonight, but I want to say we say daycare centers with 13 or less children are allowed in residential, I think is what it says. But anyway, I think that it'll be important for us to kind of go back and make sure that we're being consistent in our land use table when we come back to that, and compare this to and I'll help with that when we get back to it, but and make sure that we're addressing these in the land use table where each one of these fits. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Use the same language.
Yep. under license and registration certificates, again, this was kind of pulled out of state requirements. So daycare centers and group daycare homes shall be licensed by Department of Health and Human Services. So that kind of goes to your question. The other facilities don't require licensing. So that's why we put these, basically wrote that way.
A daycare in a family setting doesn't require licensing?
No, anything less than, I think if you're under 13 kids, you're not required to have a license. That's been pretty standard for quite a while. Once you get over 13 kids, then they require a license, then you're required to be licensed.
I would hope so.
The question I have, Jeremy, is for the definitions, if we shouldn't in parentheses reference where in Montana code that definition came from?
MCA.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, the only other thing we could do is we could, if you wanted to simplify this section so that you didn't have to modify this if state definitions change, is you could simply say definitions are consistent with Montana code annotated section whatever, right? And then we could modify the land use table up above to match that. That way, if that's the only thing sometimes is if you don't, because if the MCA definition changes, now you're not really in compliance with that definition anymore. But they don't change.
I think it's important to have the definition articulated.
I agree, because then you're not having to go to MCA to try to find it.
Yeah, I hate reading a document and then just referencing another document that I may or may not have ready access to. So I think have maybe just all my point was just to put in parentheses just that's kind of where it came from, and you could put the date just of the current date for MCA or whatever, but
yeah,
you could use
the date on the
all
front.
Or
We have a date on the front. I don't think we need to reference the date of MCA.
we could say or current MCA. If that would supersede it, because state law would supersede local law anyway. So.
All right. Yeah. Huh.
Good comments. All right. So let's see. Compatible appearance. I just added daycare facilities just because we kind of updated that up above. In residential zoning districts shall maintain a residential appearance as viewed from the street. So that's those larger facilities that aren't required to be conducted out of a home, right?
Right.
Can they be like rainbow colors or?
If you want them to be. Centers for children, outdoor play areas. So again, in this, I don't know. I mean, some of this feels like maybe it's getting a little bit in the weeds, because I feel like for daycare centers or facilities, if they're licensed, they have requirements for some of these things anyways. So are we getting a little bit in the weeds a little bit on what we're requiring? I don't know. I guess I'm on the fence. Again, this section is up to you guys. I just wanted to bring it up that this might be getting a little bit in the weeds on making sure they're requiring play areas and stuff when I think the state has those requirements already.
I think you're correct in looking down at B. I think for a front fence, the city requirement is it doesn't exceed 42 inches.
Right.
And we're saying, 6-foot high solid fence, and I don't know if that's a state requirement or not, but it kind of goes against the residential appearance if you've got a row of,
6-foot high fence.
if you've got a house in the middle of the block with a 6-foot high fence in front, so.
Now, the one thing that I could say is that the 20-foot wide buffer between adjoining residential dwellings, that one may be a good one to keep, just because I think I'm a grumpy old man now, and I think I would probably be grumpy if I had a bunch of yelling kids right on my property boundary.
There's not a
Didn't
lot.
you just have a grandkid?
Except for my grandkid. My grandkid can yell and scream.
Uh-huh.
Well, we have 50-foot wide lots.
Yeah,
And if we have 20
foot,
feet on each side, there's only 10 feet left for the daycare.
In Old Town, you just couldn't do it. I know.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah,
the whole point. You can do it
I
in
could
Old
s-
Town.
Yeah, I could see that too. So I'm just speaking for my grumpy old man. I have grumpy old man syndrome sometimes. So
My next door neighbor has 5 kids from 2 till 12. So
You become grumpy old man?
no, I love it when they're home. If they're not home, it sounds weird.
What does the state actually say about the outdoor play area and fencing?
I'd have to look into that. I could research and then bring that back to you.
Because if in fact the state has already called out play areas and fencing for the licensing, then we should just go with MCA.
Yeah, and that's gonna exclude a lot of property if that's the case. So
Well,
if it is what it is,
yeah, unless they're R1, where they're larger parcels
Yeah.
to start with.
Well, I think that goes back again to the land use tables where
Yes.
whether it's permitted or conditional use, and if in a residential area, if the state requirement is 6-foot high fence, then you're
And
not
20
gonna,
feet from the,
you're not gonna want to have a center for children or daycare center within the residential area, because it's different than,
yeah.
so it kind of forces a larger facility into a more commercial or.
Or would have to be, there's the one down,
Oh,
Coop.
I did a quick search while you guys were talking. And Department of Public Health and Human Services requires 75 square feet of outdoor play area per child. And then they have requirements for be free of hazards like wells, machinery, blah, blah, blah. Then they also have an indoor space requirement, 35 square feet per child.
So maybe we just take it out.
I think so, because if that changes, you're going to be in direct conflict with state requirements. Right now, it looks like you're consistent with it, but that could change, and then you would be requiring something different than the state does. And then under
Yeah.
Go ahead. And then under fencing, under fencing, it says the outdoor play area has to be fully enclosed. Fence height is typically 4 feet minimum, with 6 feet preferred adjacent to roads, parking lots, drainages, or hazards. And then it has gate requirements, no gaps, separation from parking lots and hazards, other stuff like that.
And they have to abide by those state rules in order to get their license?
Anything that's licensed, yeah. Yep.
Yep. So I guess we need to make sure when we go back and look at the tables, we have daycare centers as one of the items that we're gonna have to look at where it's gonna be
Right.
permitted or conditional.
So number 4, instead of centers for children, it'd be facilities for children? Or daycare facilities?
I would say take this out, or you could say Or you could say, if you wanted to leave something in there, you could say, site elements or something, and reference the MCA code for the requirements. But again, then that's getting back to Jeff's comment about, citing, different
Another
codes.
document.
I mean, they're going to be required, if they're licensed, they're going to be required to follow the MCA requirements, right? So
Right.
the only thing I could say, if you wanted to do something, if you wanted to keep these in here, would be to make these apply to the ones that aren't licensed. So the ones that are under 13 kids that don't have to get a license, you could put these same requirements in, because they don't have to technically comply with this because they're not licensed, right? So then you're basically taking that on, these pieces on instead of the state, and saying, okay, you have to provide this much, and you have to provide fencing, and right.
So the state requires the one, but it has no requirements or licensing for just a daycare.
For eight or fewer.
Yeah, if you're under 13 kids out of your home, there's no license required.
So that's where the city does need to come in.
You could, yes. So we could change this to say, instead of saying daycare facilities, update that to daycare, family daycare home, or group daycare home. Both of those are less than 13 kids. So you would change daycare center, daycare facilities to those two uses, and then that applies to those. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we still have the fence issue.
Well, I think you could just change it to be consistent with the state requirements, which are 4 feet minimum.
Yeah, but that's 48 and ours is 42.
Or just change it to 42 then. Again, this isn't the licensed facility, so you can do whatever you want, because this is your unlicensed,
For
right?
the unlicensed.
If you want to be, or you could just say fencing in compliance, fencing is required, fencing shall be in compliance with the fencing requirements of section 1.
Whatever zone they're in.
Right. Yeah, you could just do it that way. So under fencing, you'd say, and you already say, notwithstanding other standards of this ordinance that regulate fences, which basically would say you can't exceed, the fence requirements. But we could just say this, we could just say, again, it'd be for group daycare home and family daycare home. We could just say shall provide solid fencing. Do we want to require solid fencing, or could you do chain link or something?
Wow.
I think that solid is safer for children, so people walking by can't offer them candy to the fence.
So I would say shall provide just take 6 foot high out, solid fence, in compliance with fencing requirements of the district or something like that.
As a zone, yeah.
Well,
and do we want to take the buffer area out?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's extreme.
Honestly, I think that this is more often going to be a case of somebody who already owns a home, have kids, taking in additional kids for daycare, and more often than not, it's going to be a code enforcement issue instead of somebody actually coming to us for permission.
Yeah, because they don't have to.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be me and or whoever's reviewing zoning, right? They'll need to submit a change of use if it's a permitted use in the district, right? then they would just submit an application for zoning review for a change of use to allow the daycare facility.
I'm just saying that most of the time, Jeremy, this is gonna come because Brian Hanna's driving around and
Oh, I know.
notices that there's 10 kids playing in somebody's yard every day, and they're always different kids, you know, so.
Yep,
We're still
no,
can,
no,
Take care, yeah.
yeah, for sure. I totally, totally understand that. So, yep. But that's the point where, you know, again, if they do that though, they're technically in violation of zoning, right? Because they didn't get a
Yeah.
change of use. And we didn't do it for the standard. So that's the point where you either talk to them and say, hey, you really need a zoning permit for this. And there's requirements for this use that you need to comply with, right? And
Yeah.
if they don't comply, then you send them a violation letter, city attorney gets involved, all that fun stuff. So.
And just hear Chelsea.
Well, just
in our
affordable
ear.
affordable childcare, right? I mean, do we really want to go down that path?
Yeah,
I mean, because that's truly what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
You're talking about someone that's gonna take kids in, they're not gonna have the money or they wouldn't be doing it. So do we really want to get into that position? I say no.
well, especially if it's unlicensed, if it's
Yeah,
an unlicensed
exactly, if
place.
it's not
you know,
licensed. When you go to the license, that's a whole different scenario, and
different
that's also
requirements.
compliance, and that's the state, and that's not
That's
even us.
covered, yeah.
So I think as a city, I don't think, my opinion is if it's not regulated, then not, I mean, just for the affordability piece of it more than anything.
I think really all we're asking for them to do is have a solid fence,
Yeah.
and that makes sense.
I think we should stay with the height requirements, because you want uniformity down a block too. You don't want
Yeah, 42
somebody in the
inch,
middle of the block having
solid.
to put a higher fence up because it's an unlicensed facility, you know, so.
So kind of going back to the definitions, what we're talking about here really is, if I understood what you were saying, is we're simply dealing with the family daycare home, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if number 4 should, rather than centers for children, ought to just refer back to
Family daycare.
the family daycare
Yep.
home for consistency.
Yeah, it should be, family daycare home and group daycare home would be the two, right?
Yeah.
'Cause they're under 13, so they're not licensed.
And that's the only category that's not licensed, right?
Correct, yeah, those
The
two
group-
categories, yep.
Daycare and family daycare.
Up above it says that group daycare homes shall be licensed. So,
Oh, yeah, it does,
just above 2, the last item in 1.
yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, so I apologize. It's just family daycare homes up to 8 aren't licensed. So yeah, you're correct. My bad. So that should just be daycare, family daycare home. Yep,
And that's up to 8,
that's up to 8.
and
Yep,
that's what
3 to 8 children. Yep, sorry about that. Yeah, you're right.
75 square feet per child.
So if you had 8 kids, that'd be 8 times 75. That's 600 square feet.
trying to vision.
600 square feet. That's not huge.
Not as big
No,
as my apartment.
That's not huge.
But it's bigger than one of the
Kids.
Buchner Park cabins.
Yeah,
That's per kid.
yeah. I don't think that's unreasonable.
It is unreasonable or not?
I don't think, but
Oh,
yeah. A little bit bigger than,
I do kind of agree with affordability and maybe providing fencing or requiring fencing, because fencing can, especially solid fencing, can be expensive.
Yeah.
That, providing the outdoor play area, that's just your yard, right? So, I mean, that's really not adding cost per se, but if you require a solid fence around 600 square feet, that could be a fairly decent bill for a vinyl solid fence.
I'm wondering if we should not even specify that it could be chain link or solid or
Just say fence.
just a fence, whatever. Is that's what's,
I think your purpose is containment.
right.
Yeah, is the purpose containment of the children?
Yeah.
Or is the purpose for safety of the children from outside sources?
I don't know.
I think it's a little bit of both, but I would say mostly containment of children. So they're not wandering off into the street or neighbors' yards or, that kind of thing. Because kids like to wander, right?
If they can.
I like to wander sometimes, but, so do we want to just take solid out, just say provide a fence in compliance with fencing requirements of the applicable zone?
I think so.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Provides more flexibility.
Yeah.
I think that's probably good. Okay.
Does every zone require fencing?
It's what?
Does every zone require fencing?
No.
No. So that's not going to work because not every zone requires fencing.
No, but you're requiring fencing for the.
Well, the fencing, the fencing just would be in compliance with the fencing regulations. So height requirements and those.
Yeah, but we are requiring them to have a fence.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, we don't want a stake and rope or chain, so.
Yeah, it says shall provide. It says shall provide a fence. So we are requiring that they provide a fence. So.
Around the property or around the play area or?
Play area.
Play area.
Yeah.
Play
Can
area.
we say play area?
Yeah, we should say that probably. Provide a fence around the outdoor play area.
Yeah.
Okay. We hit this one hard enough?
Yeah.
Jeez.
So under signs, I think we just do the same thing we did with bed and breakfast. Yeah. We just referenced to the sign section, right? And again, here's an example, right? Here you're allowing 12 square feet of sign area for a daycare, but you only allowed 6 square feet for a bed and breakfast.
Right.
So, okay.
Okay.
I think we're done with daycares.
Oh gosh.
All right, let's go on to home occupations. I actually didn't have I'm not sure what's going on with formatting, but I actually didn't have a whole lot under home occupations. I thought that this was pretty good. Unless there's something in here that you guys want to, that you've seen in the community that is an issue that you want to address. The only thing I had, it would be under signs, again, you go back to 6 square feet for signs. So just addressing, just changing that to reference the sign section. Interestingly, parking, you have, you direct everybody to the parking and loading standards section. So,
yeah.
Actually, we need to add that to the daycare. Connor, can you move that section and copy that up into the daycare center section too? Because we need to direct them.
Well, the home daycare, we don't need to worry about parking because they drop them off.
Yeah, but for daycare, for the bigger daycares, we would want.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, especially with employees.
Yes, because there are.
Yeah, the only thing I really had in this one was under signs, you say there, it says containing wall signs containing the name, title, and occupation of the home. The Supreme Court says we can't review content of signs. And so I just had a note there that we can't do that, but I think we take care of that when we review the sign section. If we just change this to point to the sign section. We'll always want to be careful on signs that we're not reviewing content, because we
Yep.
legally cannot review content. I didn't have anything else in this section that really stood out to me that was out of the ordinary or that I saw was an issue. This seems to be pretty standard language for home occupations.
I just have to challenge the one per residence. We have a lot of, and I don't know if it would be fall under the definition of home occupations, but we have a good number of people in town who are remote workers, and their home is their remote office, and it's not just an individual. Sometimes it's both husband and wife, or in a roommate situation, it's both people. So
I don't classify somebody working remotely at a job from home as a home occupation. A home occupation is defined as a business out of a residence. So you're operating some kind of a business, like for instance, somebody like does tax preparation and they just do it out of their house, and people come to them and you know they're operating a business out of that home. That's a home occupation. So yeah,
they would actually have having and parking there, et cetera. So
right, yep. Yeah. Somebody who's just working from home, that's just their job. That's not a home occupation. They're not operating a business out of that.
Okay.
And I do kind of have a question on the trucks prohibited. I can understand that they shouldn't be parked overnight on the street, but who cares if they're parked on the premises itself? It's your own land.
Yeah, I think the issue that we've got, I've had in other communities, and I think this is probably where this comes from, is people operating semi trucks and parking semi trucks on their property. That has been an issue in other communities where somebody's operating a little trucking outfit out of their home, and they come home every day and park their big semi truck.
We do have a place on North Hagen that has a semi and other heavy equipment parked on the premise.
It's their land.
It's their land. I know.
What about anything that prohibits blocking signs with the tall vehicles? So we have problems where they're parking it in front of speed signs.
Well, that's street enforcement ordinance stuff. That's not zoning. Zoning only applies to private property. Zoning doesn't apply within street rights of way. That's a different ordinance.
Well, the only reason I bring it up is we already have these existing situations, and if we're going to have language here that we don't enforce and we're not going to enforce, we shouldn't have it. So that's.
And I always err on the side of the homeowner and the landowner.
Yeah.
If they want to park a great big old rig on their property overnight.
I think the bigger issue would be if they parked on the street.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But not
usually
on
it just
their own
comes
land.
from, we, like in other communities where we've added this because we didn't have it, it was because there were complaints from neighbors that somebody was parking their big rig on their property, and they were starting it up at 4 o'clock in the morning and leaving it running for 20 minutes and waking everybody up. And that's usually where this has come from. But I certainly see I'm a private property rights guy. I really am. And so I agree.
I agree with you, but I'd say we already have those situations and we haven't enforced it ever. And so I don't see us enforcing it. So
Well, I've had a semi parked out like 2 doors down for how many years?
Yeah.
And you just don't look that way.
Yeah, exactly. It is what it is.
Well, it's not in the planning board part, but there's there is something in one of the city documents about how many days you may be parked on the street.
Exactly.
But
That's usually
Exactly.
for RV or,
Yeah,
it,
and
it can be just a
that's a
regular.
it
city
could be
ordinance.
regular cars, you're right.
That, so parking on the street, that's obvious, but the parking on your own private land, whether it's enclosed in a building or not. And I mean, we have sound ordinances as well,
Mhm.
so,
Well, yeah, at a minimum, we should take the parking overnight on the street out because that is not enforced by zoning anyways. That's
Exactly.
a different ordinance. Street parking is separate.
the ordinance.
But I mean, again, this is your guys' thing. I'm just telling you my experience is where this usually comes from. It's been a complaint from somebody that somebody has a semi truck that they're starting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and running for an hour and waking everybody up. That's
And
I'm guessing that's probably where this came from at some point, is probably something like that. But I see it both ways. I think it's I think it's a little bit of an overreach as well, in my opinion, to limit what people can park on their property. But
Man, I could ride around town and find high lifts and skid steers and
there was, I did hear one complaint about a guy over on Platt in the back, on the alley, that he parks all kinds of heavy
he
equipment
does,
on his property.
on his property, or the adjacent property of the neighbors.
And the chief said it's on his property.
I know.
You know, and
There's
I
a
don't,
high lift on 13th. you know.
yeah, and you know, that's a different story, that's on city property and they can deal with that.
Yeah,
But you only have to move it 6 inches.
well, I'm just saying, we don't enforce these things.
Yeah, well, we're hoping that.
so we should we just take that out then?
I think so.
Take that
I do
section out?
too.
Yeah, I don't see,
We'll let the mayor start pushing for the enforcement.
Jeff is thinking no.
That's fair, that's his job.
Now, nuisance, I mean, you could make an argument that the next section down, nuisances prohibited, would kind of cover the city if somebody called and made a complaint about something, because we do say, you know, occupation shall not create or constitute a nuisance for neighboring property, such as excessive traffic, noise, odor, vibrations, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, I guess noise, you could say if somebody's, I don't know. I think that would be a complaint-driven thing, and whether or not the city wants to pursue that or not would be
Well,
up to
then
the
you-
city, but
I guess you'd have grounds at that point, if someone complained, to go knock on the door and say, hey, the neighbors have complained about, you know,
No, we have a complaint.
yes, we have a complaint.
We have a complaint. Yeah, I would take out the truck section and leave the nuisance to cover it.
okay. Any other comments on home occupations?
And what about outside storage? We went roundabout on this one, when we were doing the checker box list.
We have an
I have
outside, we have a section on outside storage of equipment, materials, merchandise, inventory, or heavy equipment that is associated with the home occupation shall be prohibited.
You know, that's the one that, again, that's another,
Mm-hmm.
Private property issue.
yeah.
Exactly.
You know, I guess I don't have an issue with a truck or a piece of equipment. But if it's a construction company and they have multiple trucks, multiple pieces of equipment, is that a use we want to see in our residential areas?
But that goes back to the use of the home. That's running a business out of it. So then you could use that as that. Right? Because you can have that kind of equipment and that much equipment, then you're running a business out of it.
But that's kind of what this is getting at, right?
Yeah.
This is home occupation, so you're running a business, a construction business out of your home. You've got 3 skid loaders and 2 dump trucks. Is that really something that you want to see parked next door to your house in your residential area?
I
Well,
think,
that would go back
and I agree with Jeff. I mean, I think that, even though it's restricted to one employee. So the resident plus one non-resident employee, but you could have two guys running a construction company that could have several pieces of equipment plus any materials like, lumber or, roofing materials, siding materials, plywood, any of those kind of materials for storage. If they're running that big of a business, they probably shouldn't be operating in a residential area.
We've got it all around town.
But should it be?
No, what are we, well,
I mean,
so are we going to do?
you can't base zoning just based on,
What we already have, I know.
you're kind of thinking about, and maybe it is an enforcement issue, and maybe that's something that it needs to be enforced.
So if we just look at this as a new application, then I'm 100% on board. And and I agree. What do we want to have?
Well,
We also have to have a spine about enforcement on.
we have an
already illegal.
area for maximum area. The home occupation shall not occupy more than 33% of the total floor of the dwelling unit, including accessory buildings. It would also be including the acreage on the land. And that would restrict having a lot of heavy equipment out
Parked on
there,
the property.
because the home occupation should only occupy 33% of the entire parcel. Maybe something like that would be the limit. Whether it's 33% of the building or 33% of the land, or
Well, I'm not sure I like that because, the structure, if somebody's operating a business out of their home, and nothing else, then, and say the structure is 30% of their lot area, then technically you're saying they could operate their entire home as a business. But the point is it's a home occupation, so the primary purpose of the use is residential. The business is secondary or accessory, basically, right? So you want to make sure that your structures are not being totally used for business, that the residential use has to be the primary use of the property, state primary use. Does that make sense?
Well, then could you put reference then to so many vehicles then can you tighten it up in that language though, somehow, from a business use perspective? Not to
we
say
could
we
say,
have to have.
we could say 33% of the total floor area of the dwelling unit, including accessory buildings, and no more than 33% of the outdoor space or remaining property, or I don't know. We could play with the language a little bit, but I think that's what you're getting at, right? Is we have the restriction on the structure, and then a similar restriction on the actual remaining land, right?
But G is outside storage. So we already have outside storage of equipment, materials, merchandise, inventory, or heavy equipment that is associated with the home occupation shall be prohibited.
Yep.
So we've really already covered that under outside storage.
You're right.
Where is that under
It's
a
G.
different?
Yeah, it's under G. It's very specific.
That's a G, yeah.
Okay.
And so that would prohibit them
Yeah.
putting all those weird pieces of things on the
Yeah.
land.
Not just.
But again, I think it does, there's a two-pronged approach too, though. Like you said, it's, okay, this is the people that come in and actually get a zoning permit, or, for what they're doing. And we say, no, you can't, this is what you can and can't do, right? And then you have those people that are just doing it. And that's the enforcement piece. Like there has to be an enforcement piece, but it's hard because, especially in small towns, because if If you don't have some kind of a compliance person that's doing that, then it's a violation-based system or a complaint-based system where you don't even know that it's probably happening unless somebody calls and complains about it, and then you do something about it, right? So it's that's the enforcement is the hard part. It really is, because like you said, this is really happening all over the city and nobody's enforced it.
We are a complaint-based system. We really are.
So,
And
The police department
most
is
small
very
towns
major.
are.
Yeah, it's complaints.
well,
Yeah, most small towns are, because you can't afford to hire somebody to go around making sure everybody's complying with the code. So,
Sandy, the one you brought up that has all the equipment and the two-story structure, there is actually a current building permit open on that structure because it's not completed yet. And so, yeah, this is done under, this language is not new.
No.
We do have an enforcement issue, and I guess that's like, we have to be
It's
really.
complaint-based system. When somebody complains, then they'll go ahead and enforce,
But nobody will, so there you go.
because it's a small town. Anyway, I think that we're covered between the inside structure and the outside storage. Maybe it shouldn't be called storage, but that's really what it is.
Yeah. I'm just concerned about the appearance of arbitrariness if there is litigation.
That's dirty.
We just make the rules.
Good luck with that.
Well, that was one of his goals.
Oh, that'd be his
Don't
fun
make
time.
rules that-
If you really get down to it, though, I mean, the whole thing with zoning is our compliance,
Yeah,
and so.
Exactly.
yeah. Anyway, we need better enforcement. Anyway,
And we know
I
that.
think it looks good.
I think that we're pretty good.
Jeff, we're almost 7:20. What are your
Oh.
Before we start into manufactured homes.
Time goes fast when
Yeah.
you're having fun.
Yeah, yep, I don't know if we want to start the next section now or wait. I haven't gone much past here, so it might be a good place to stop so I can get ahead of you guys and have comments for you going forward. I would like to say that along with manufactured home communities standards, we need to talk about RV parks. And I think I talked to a couple of you at the meeting when I was there a few weeks ago, but this is the point where we need to re-talk about RV parks and whether or not we're going to allow them in the city or not. Because the reason I say that is because state law changed. RV parks and manufactured home community parks are no longer reviewed as a subdivision. They're reviewed under buildings for lease or rent. But because the city has zoning, you don't have buildings for lease or rent regulations. And so you have two options. Either you don't allow them in the city limits and we just don't put standards in here and we say in the land use we just don't include it in your land use table at the beginning of the document, right, that we went through. And basically you're saying no RV parks. We don't want them in the city limits. And that's fine with me if that's what you want to do. Or if you do want to allow them somewhere, say in one of the entrance districts or somewhere, then we need to add the RV park standards from the subdivision regulations. We need to pull them from the subdivision regulations and add them into the zoning regulations.
So you pull them from subdivision, but they're not a subdivision.
They're not because the standards are in subdivision now, but they're no longer reviewed as a subdivision. So I guess what I'm saying is that's your homework to think about, and for the next meeting is whether or not you want RV parks in the city or not, and maybe talk to some people in town and try to get a sense for what people think about doing that.
And I guess I'll just add, kind of comment onto that is think about where there is a place for an RV park, because just because we're going to allow RV parks
Where?
doesn't mean that we're going to that there's a place for them. So that's kind of number one to think about. And really, the only place they can be is in one of the commercial districts,
Or if we annex some land,
or
and then would look at it at that point.
Yep.
but that would depend on how it was zoned. So the other comment, I guess, think about is the big issue is workforce housing and space.
Yep.
So is it a higher priority to make space for RV park, or is it a higher priority to have that space for additional
Workforce.
housing,
Tiny homes. Is that what you're getting
And,
at?
and I would also just say also that,
any kind of, just basically housing, I guess, is maybe, so those are two things to think about.
It doesn't have
And I
to
would-
be either or.
And then
and
the
I would
other
also
thing is,
say, oh, go ahead, Jeff, sorry.
well, the other thing is, going back to our growth policy, an RV park was never mentioned
In the growth.
as a need or an objective or a goal in our growth policy. So that's something else to sort of think about as you dwell over whether we should have RV parks or not. Go ahead, Jeremy. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, you're fine. I would say I just add 2 points to that. RV parks would generally be considered commercial use, right? Because you're operating a business to rent spaces for RVs to park. So they would be appropriate in a commercial setting, right? So think about that. They're not appropriate, I would say, for residential zoning. But if you were to consider it somewhere, a commercial would be the appropriate place. Second, I would say on the kind of piggybacking on workforce housing, RV parks have become an affordable place for people to live. And so I would think about that too, though, because we are seeing a lot of instances where people are able to get into an RV for, $20,000-$30,000 for a nice RV, park it on a rented RV slot, and for a couple $100 a month, and people are doing that sometimes on a permanent basis because they can't afford a house. So I would say that could go towards the workforce or affordable housing, and being as some of your population is somewhat transient, depending on what they do, that an RV park situation would maybe benefit some of those people that are transient, that maybe come during the winter time to do ski or winter activities, right? And then transition, and then you have other people coming in for summer type activities. So I would just point that out, that is also been an affordable option as of late. And I think with the proper standards, you can make RV parks that look decent, right? You can require landscaping requirements, you require access requirements. I mean, there's certain things and standards that you can apply to make RV parks look somewhat attractive.
Well, the only reason I mention is our commercial zones are somewhat limited in space, so
It certainly wouldn't be a big
Well, and
spot.
somebody, you could always say, well, we don't technically allow it as a use, but I mean, I think if somebody were to propose it as a planned unit development, it might be something that you could approve as a planned unit development, as a PUD, right? So if somebody proposed, say, a mixed use type development where they had a mix of uses, including, say, an RV park, say it was a piece of property that was being annexed into the city, and they wanted to do an RV park closer down to Rock Creek, but they were going to have residential and commercial up by the highway. That could be a PUD type option where they're kind of proposing a mixed use development. The other thing I would point out, that RV parks are technically okay to do in floodplains. So where you can't necessarily build homes in the floodplain, RV parks are an allowed use in the floodplain because it's a movable, it's not a structure. You can, if the flooding is coming, you can move it, right?
But
So
it's paved, and the pavement is allowed in a flood zone?
Yeah.
in the flood, not in the floodway.
But-
You can't do work in the floodway, but a zone, but the 100-year floodplain, you'd have to get a floodplain permit for it, right? But you can develop RV parks and campgrounds in the floodplain.
Okay.
Which would be the Eagle's Nest.
All right.
I think it might be floodway.
I know, but you know what I mean. Like,
I guess move on. Any written correspondence from
Anybody?
staff communications up?
The only thing I don't have any updates on Spires. They're still have not responded to our sufficiency comments. So we're still waiting on that. So no updates there. We did get an application for a neon sign design review at that new casino CUP that you guys reviewed a few months back. So we're working through the completeness and comments on that before we move forward with a planning board review and public hearing on that. So
the rest of it, but okay.
Okay.
hopefully that'll come to you in June if I'm working through logistical issues and my comments, and I haven't heard back from them, so I don't know if it's going to go away or if it's going to come back. I have no idea at this point, but that may come to you guys in June. So.
All right. Public comment. Do you have any comments you'd like to make?
We said for a long time to find out he's really got nothing going on with the Spires more than what I saw.
Yeah.
Actually, I just kind of off the record, I wanted to sit through here anyway, because in taking this thing over, the compliance and all the rest of it, and people to come at you because you should be making sure that everybody picks up their dog poop or has a dog on a leash or whatever. A majority of it's all city stuff anyway. As far as just jurisdiction, we don't have any rules or anything else. So just nice to kind of see that. But there's also some things that I've picked up that are some issues up there that are really more what you guys were talking about anyway. We got, people parking 9 or 10 boats on their property and kind of running the guiding service out of it, and people complaining and how do you enforce it and all the rest of it. So it's been more informational for me than anything else.
Glad we can help.
Jeremy, I think you're still on the line. I can just add to that. My understanding is that your homeowners association actually is layered on top of what we're doing here.
Right.
So you guys can do a lot more than we could.
Right.
And again,
But the enforcement of,
the enforcement, it always comes down to, are you willing to?
back to your original conversation earlier.
Yeah.
Anybody online?
Mr. Chairman, there are folks online, but I do not see any raised hands or cameras or indication or comments that they'd like to comment.
All right. Do you have any more comments, Mayor?
The comments that I was gonna make, it's one of those where I don't need to comment, because I think between the discussion amongst yourself, you all hit it on the RV parks. I do think it's important to take into account, potential annexations and the floodway, flood zone stuff, because that is stuff that could very much become part of the conversation. And, I appreciated the comments about, that actually is a very common use for seasonal workers and stuff. In fact, the one that we do have in town, which was kind of let's not repeat that process again, but that actually gets used for the seasonal, as an inexpensive way to put seasonal folks up. So I do think, like I said, and all of those points got raised. So I'm really working on shutting up, and when it's not necessarily saying today I failed, but I'll just add I was glad to see all three of those points kind of come up in relation to that conversation.
All right. We're adjourned.
No fanfare.
Everyone.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, Jeremy.